G'day, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Scale Ups podcast. This is a very different podcast this week. I really hope you enjoy it. I feel a bit vulnerable even doing the, the intro for you. Um, I realized that I have spent the last couple of years, of course, interviewing lots of other guests and telling their stories and trying to elicit all the value for the audience. But I actually realized, and this is probably something I've known about myself for a while, sometimes I don't share my story. I don't share my background. I don't share my history and kind of where, what life was like, how I got to doing what I did, how I was able to, with my teams, create $100 million in revenue in four companies over 8 years, and that kind of led me to doing what I do today. But also, of course, there's a backstory to that because I was a pretty wayward teenager, believe it or not. And I was chatting to a colleague of mine, Jaemin Fraser, who runs a podcast called Unhindered. And he's one of the just the greatest coaches I've ever met. I've listened to his podcast for years, and I know no other coaches who are willing to put their coaching skills on display for the whole world. He does live coaching sessions on his podcast. So if you want to check it out, you absolutely should. It's called Unhindered. He's written some fantastic books, which I refer other people to on a regular basis. But anyway, I thought, well, I don't want to be talking and telling my own story. That doesn't really make any sense. So I actually invited Jaemin onto the podcast to interview me. So today's podcast is Jaemin interviewing me about my story on Scale Up's podcast, and I'm actually going to be interviewing Jaemin for his podcast. So bit of a different kind of an episode. I hope you enjoy it. I'm very open to questions. If you're kind of going, wow, I had no idea she wanted that kind of background, or geez, I want to give him some feedback, what a complete idiot, then feel free to reach out to me, and I'd love to hear from you. But hope you enjoyed today's podcast. It is a little bit longer than normal, but hope you find it insightful in some way.
Welcome to the Scale Ups podcast, where each week you get to hear Sean Steele, professional CEO, growth mentor, and advisory board chair, unpack the strategies that successful founders have used to achieve scale in their businesses. Stay tuned as he interviews the entrepreneurs who've made it, learns from industry experts, and follows a group of founders still striving to scale.
Sean, this is a vulnerable thing you've invited me to do with you today, to ask you questions about yourself and give you an opportunity to share your story in a way that your audience have never heard you tell. So I love storytelling. I love going back to the start. And, the work that you do, which is very impressive, I think a huge component of helping people to scale up is got to be around their own internal story, where they started, who they think they are, what they think they're capable of. Sooner or later, you're going to bang your head on some narrative that says you're this good but not that good. You can work with these kind of people but not those kind of people. You can earn this amount of money but not that amount of money. And so there's all the metrics and the business skills and the levers to grow and improve what you do and scale up. But then at some point, there's the sense of, do I have permission from myself to scale up? Because scaling up means standing out, and that's stepping into the light and drawing more attention to yourself. So you've obviously found a way to do that for yourself. You obviously found a way to do that for your clients. So I'm really fascinated about how you did that consciously and unconsciously from where you started. So can you tell me the start? Like, what was it like growing up in your world and the impact your parents had on you as a young man and the kind of way they thought about the world and their map of things? And tell us how it started for you.
Well, first, let me say I'm really excited about this conversation because I don't think any of my clients, and certainly not my audience, would ever have heard probably any of this really. So, and I've had such respect for you for so long because your level of sort of vulnerability and authenticity on your podcast, which is part of the reason why I said, like, why don't we swap this? Why don't you interview me on my podcast and I'll interview you on your podcast? Let's just see what happens for fun. And when I think about where it all started, I grew up, first of all, I have to say, I was super privileged and fortunate to have incredibly loving parents. So I grew up in a very high, high encouragement environment. So I had my mum used to be like an army librarian. My dad was originally a priest, and he left the order when he was a bit younger, he went into foreign affairs. And so we spent all of our early years traveling around the world. We were living in Switzerland and Argentina and the Philippines and all over the place because my dad was in the embassies. But when they came back to, so I had this strange upbringing where, um, like all the way up until 10, I thought just, that's what you did. Like, you've got to ski in Germany this weekend and then Italy the next weekend. And I just thought that was normal. And then when we came back to Canberra, both my parents went back to sort of government roles, but all the perks disappeared. So all of a sudden it was just like back to reality. We were living in a pretty old house that they'd had since the early 70s in Canberra. My mum had to go to work. I'd go back to work because, there was no one paying the extra bills. My dad, tried to start a business as a migration, or did start a business as a migration agent because he was a real humanitarian. So wanted to serve political refugees and did a lot to have a life of service in Canberra. But it didn't bring dollars, and there was zero entrepreneurial streak in either of them. So what I remember, there's so many influences, but I remember like my childhood was really sort of a feeling. Like when I think back on it, I just remember feeling loved all the time and encouraged, which is, I know, a privilege that lots of people don't get. On the flip side, whilst that was incredible, and it was, by the time I was a teenager, I felt I clearly needed more than that because I was pretty out of control between the ages of, probably 13 and 17, where I think I was mostly bored, but that turned into a lot of different stuff. It's joyriding cars, shoplifting and getting arrested multiple times, breaking people's noses in fights. I remember I got one kid, I poured sulfuric acid down the back of his jacket. And I remember like smoking in the science room and him then wanting to come over with his dad to beat up me and my dad. And like, it was just, this was, stashing cigarettes every day into
So
my
you
little
were a shit
cassette
of a
case.
kid.
I was
Wow.
a shitbag. I really was, as a teenager. And I got to like 16, 17, and all I could see was more of the same. Like the people I'd surrounded myself with were like that. I'd kind of created this little, I don't know, persona around it, and I didn't know how to get myself out of it. And so I'd ask my parents, can I change schools? Because I actually need a clean start. Like I need to go somewhere where I've got no baggage because I don't want this forever. I need to do something different. And they were like, yep, go for it. So I sort of started with a clean slate. I don't think I completely
I'm
corrected
gonna
straight away, but
I got to pull you up there. I'm just this is fascinating. Um, Before you talk about how you got out of it, I'm really interested in how you got into it. So
mm,
you were bored, and then you went from being really loved, having a great experience of being in family, seeing some cool things around the world, coming back to Canberra, and then having a less glamorous life that led to a bit of boredom. Is there anything else that you think was part of this decision to be more than rebellious, but even a little reckless?
yeah, I was definitely reckless. What else was part of it? Uh, I think that I really actually think the majority of it was I was kind of I was looking for excitement. Like I was like,
Mm.
Canberra, like didn't like my school. It was a real shithole of a school. It's just, it's drugs and fighting and all sorts of stuff everywhere. And I just was not really enjoying life. So it was probably a bit of escapism and going, well, this kind of sucks. How do I make my life more interesting? Well, let's just push the boundaries. And because maybe this was the flip side of having such loving parents, is I knew they would be understanding. Like I remember getting busted joyriding in my mate's car. It was literally, I don't know, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. We'd stolen his parents' car and we'd taken it up the mountain, and we were like on the way to driving to a bottle. His dad's best friend drove past in his car and saw us driving his best mate's car, and with his best mate's son in the passenger seat. And we were like, had this massive freak out. Anyway, we like lost him in the suburbs. It was, hearts palpitating. The next day, so this was a great example. Yeah, the next day, well, while some of the kids got the belt, some kids got grounded for like 3 months. I got grounded for I think 2 weeks, and like that was pretty much it. There was absolutely so. I think I probably had the safety of knowing that my parents were not likely to be hard on me, even if I was, taking advantage of the situation. So I think it was mostly boredom. I don't feel like there was anything kind of unresolved. Um,
Hmm. Yeah. And but again, before you tell us how you got out of that and go on with the story, I'm curious when you think about that now, and even in the retelling of that,
mm.
how do you feel about that period of your life now? Is there oh, let me not preempt it. How do you feel about hearing yourself tell the story about that period of your life now?
Uh, sometimes it feels like the same me. Sometimes it feels like a different me. And I've always carried some level of guilt because there was a turning point, which was when my mum had to pick me up from the police station. I'd been busted shoplifting, um, and she was driving me home. And she'd always been so stoic with all this stuff that I was going on. She's always been so supportive. And all of a sudden, she just broke down. She was crying while she was driving, and I was like, "Oh my god, I have broken my mum." Like, just I had this moment where I was like, "This has to change. I can't keep doing this. This is not a
Mhm.
path that I want to be on." Um,
Mm,
and that was a so I think yeah, I hear it and I don't know. It absolutely still feels like me. I just I just maybe don't express it as much. I still love adrenaline based activities. I still love adventure. I still
mm,
love stuff that's new, that's exciting. I like changing locations. You know, Anna and I have lived in 17 different addresses in the last 20 years. We're about to move to Europe at the end of the year. We'll still be running the Australian business, but we're relocating. Why? Because of the adventure, not for any other major reason,
mm,
but it's interesting to me. So I like being put into the unknown and having
mm,
to figure out what I'm capable of. And I think maybe there was a bit of that in that period.
mm. The sense of pain around, watching the impact on your mum, that's really consistent with what causes change. Pain is a gift.
Mm.
Um, Really motivates us to do something different. But hearing you tell that story, like I hear people's stories all day, every day. That's all I'm doing is going back into the past with people, hearing stories they have never told anyone. Sometimes they've never even heard themselves say. And so often there's so much angst with these experiences in the past. But I'm listening to Bryan Cranston's autobiography at the moment. I don't know whether you're a
No,
fan of Breaking Bad or
oh
you
yeah,
like
yeah.
Bryan.
So I didn't realize Bryan Cranston. Yeah, okay, yeah. I've definitely watched Breaking Bad.
It's a fascinating book, and he's a great storyteller. And I'm a huge Breaking Bad fan, so
Hmm.
I was really looking forward to his book. Um, but I was just struck by his telling of the story of him being in Amsterdam as a 16-year-old. Got some school travel trip and a bunch of other. Oh no, maybe it was with young cadets or something with the military. Actually, that's what it was. And so there's all these rules and restrictions about what to do. They're given the talk: do not leave the barracks, do not go into pubs and clubs, do not visit
Yeah.
any dark places in dark alleys. And all these teenage boys are going, that's exactly where we're going. That's the only thing we've got on our mind. And so he was just talking about his first sexual experience in Amsterdam, going to a prostitute and all his friends, their experience of having sex with a prostitute. Now, he told it quite matter of factly, as though it happened. He's a family man now. He's loves his wife and his kids, and so part of that morality was, maybe that's not great. But as a boy, he could see it for what it was, and in the
Mm,
telling of it, there was no shame in it. It was just, this
mm.
is what happened, and yeah, I enjoyed that, and there you go. That's how I lost my virginity. So I've heard so many people tell similar stories, but the way they tell it, there is so much shame, there is so much embarrassment. It's a period of their life where they think this defines me, this makes me bad, this proves some deep flaw with my character, and so it just really impacts their whole moving forward. And so
Mm.
just reflects the fact that life is not about what happens to us; it's about the meaning we place on the things that happen to us, and
That's true.
we're the storyteller. So
Yeah.
fascinating to hear your experience of something which you go, yeah, not great, but this is what happened, and
Yeah.
this was me, and
That's what it
I'm
was.
okay.
And I made sure, of course, that, as you grow into an adult and you get that perspective or action about how, for me, how wonderful my parents were and how great the upbringing was. Um, I was the first one to apologize and kind of go, hey, like,
Mm,
I'm really sorry for the trauma that I created for you as parents, but it wasn't your fault,
mm.
uh,
Does it give you? How old are your kids now?
mine are 17 and 14. They'll be 18 and 15 this year.
Okay. Does that impact the way that you parent them? Are you empathetic in the plight of teenagers? Like, how does that? How do you relate to them going through a similar period of life?
Yeah, definitely. I think I don't know. I really wrestle with this one on a regular basis. I've tried to transition from, the kind of earlier stage directive parenting when they're, sub teens into far more coaching kind of model and give them freedom and give them independence. And at the same time, one of the things that I didn't get a lot of was actually guidance. And I think that was one of the real challenges. I was literally like, Sean, you just believe in yourself, back yourself, pretty much do whatever you want. So I was, was
Mhm.
like, great. So I was wagging school and I got horrendous scores. I had pretty much no university options available to me. And because I was just kind of mucking around and there was no one kind of going, hey, Sean, like, this is great, but maybe you should be thinking about this. So I've tried to find that balance, I think, as a dad for my own
Yeah.
kids to make sure they're absolutely strong, independent boys, financially astute, confident in their decision making, carving their own path and doing what they want to do. But of course, that creates natural tension, like any teenagers with their parents, when there are some rules, there are some boundaries, and they just want to push up against them. And that's been a constant source of tension for the last month with my older one, but not anything that I wouldn't really expect of a 17-year-old either.
Yeah. Great. All right, back to your story. So you broke your mum,
Yeah, so
and
broke
that
my
was a pivot point. What happened from there?
Changed schools. I don't know if I like sort of sorted myself out, but I knew I had the opportunity to. So when I changed schools at 16, the following couple of years, I was mucking around doing whatever subjects I felt like. But I didn't have sort of any strong kind of career guidance. So I got to the end of year 12, and having partied a lot in, as you do in year 11 and year 12. And I got to the end of it and I remember I got an average score of 75, which I thought was pretty good. I was like, oh, 75, great. I'm going to get an ATAR. Everyone's on the ATAR model in Australia. So, your scores to go into university. And I thought I was going to get an ATAR of 75 and I got an ATAR of 54. And I was like, I don't really understand that. Like, well, you did all these subjects which we would not consider academic, Sean. You're doing music, double major in drama, outdoor education, you're going on skiing trips and playing volleyball and all this other stuff. It's like none of that really counts towards university. And I was like, really? Shouldn't have somebody told me this a few years ago? And I don't know where I was, but I wasn't really paying attention to that. So I basically had a choice of arts and arts. I could go to Wagga, or I could go to Wollongong. So I went to Wollongong and started in an arts degree. But again, I got halfway through my degree and realised this is going nowhere, and there's no job for me at the end of this. So I switched to management because I thought it would be a little more, look a bit better on a resume. And at the end of it, I still didn't know how to do anything because, of course, a 19 or 20-year-old learning about stuff that you probably is relevant when you're 35 or 40 wasn't really very helpful. So I just went into sales and I pretty much hustled my way up the ladder doing all the crappy sales jobs that you can imagine, out in the back of I'll never forget this job. One of the jobs that got me through uni financially was out the back of this place called Untitled, which is it's a bit of a hole. And I was like basically in a big shed with about 25 desks, and it was literally just a phone on the desk and a white pages. And your job was to call people and invite them to property seminars about negative gearing, which is a sort of property tax strategy back in the day. And so you're calling people at dinner time, and they're like, "What do you want?" And I don't know. I actually found it quite easy and quite enjoyable, was everybody else was really struggling with it. And I was like, oh, maybe I'm actually okay at this. And that just sort of led into this sales thing that then sort of climbed on into other roles in the future.
Hang on, I've got to stop you there too. How did you find it easy? What was the narrative in your mind when you're facing angry people going, "Who are you? What are you calling?" Like the constant rejection that break most people. What was going through your head when you're experiencing that?
That's a good question. Um, I think one of the things that had started to land in my brain was one of the things that was a really surprising part of my upbringing for me was that my parents got into Amway. And so, for people who don't remember Amway, it was it's lots of cleaning products and
Yeah.
all sorts of sales and network marketing business. And my parents were the least entrepreneurial, the least extroverted, the least engaging, relationship oriented kind of people. They're just sort of government minded and very diligent and all the rest. But I had always had no idea why they were in Amway. But anyway, they therefore through my teenage years, we constantly had all this personal development stuff on in the car. I think maybe some of it,
Yeah, because that was a big part of Amway, wasn't it?
that
Like
was
it wasn't
huge.
just selling. It
No,
was about improving your lot in
absolutely.
life and taking control of your finances
It
and
was
getting ahead.
total. It was like a early Tony Robbins program, right? And I think,
Mm.
I'd latched onto things like, that every no gets you closer to a yes and all this kind of stuff. And so I think by the time I got I like talking, I like being on the phone with people, I like auditory kind of conversations, and I like engaging that way. So I think it suited my nature, but also I immediately was like, oh well, if I'm going to do this thing, I should probably try to get good at it. I remember getting Alan Pease's it was like it's one of these question books on questions, and I just started implementing the questions that he was proposing in these calls, and so I was generating 15 appointments a night when other people were doing 2 and 3, and I didn't
Mm,
feel like I was doing anything special. It just sort of felt like it kind of clicked, and it
mm.
made sense and it felt natural.
Wow, so you're in this warehouse in Untitled, desks and phones, and you're making it work. Where'd things go from there? Sorry, did you drop out of uni to do that, or are you still
Uh,
studying?
no, I finished the degree and was like, wow, okay, I'm not qualified to do anything, so I guess I'll just do sales. And then just went through. I went into multiple. I was in this. Oh, I wanted to move to Sydney, so I took a telemarketing job, setting appointments for like website salespeople. And again, I was just finding the appointment setting on the phone really easy compared to a lot of my peers. And upstairs in this building in Sydney in Liverpool Street, they had account managers for the white pages who were selling to businesses, bold listings and super bold listings, and very uninspiring product, right? But
Hmm,
I heard they were making a lot of money, and one of the managers came down who was looking at this team for potential staff for the account management. I went up into there, and the next 3 years were just magical. Like I found my feet. I think in the first 3 months, I did something like three. I posted on this on LinkedIn the other day. I found this certificate that I had from when I was 20 years old, where I'd done 363% to target or something in the first 4 months. And then the following year, I did almost 400% to target. And I was winning these sales trips around the world, and sales
wow.
just worked. Me being on the phone doing sales just felt good, but I very quickly wanted to be in leadership roles. I was spending most of my time, well, not most of my time, I was spending time anywhere that I could. I was just devouring every bit of personal development I could, Brian Tracy and Tony Robbins and Kiyosaki and all this sort of stuff to try to, because I loved the fact that you could improve yourself personally and that it could translate into results very quickly. It was such like
Mm,
instant feedback loop, okay, change my state this day, totally changed the way I was on the phone, all of a sudden got a sale that I wouldn't have got, or it was much bigger. And I was like, wow, this is just incredible sort of cycle. But I was
yeah.
trying to teach other people how to do goal setting. I was just trying to teach everybody everything that I was learning at the time that was working, and really wanted to climb into leadership roles. So picked out a general manager, said, hey, how do I become a general manager? Like, help me, guide me through
Before
the business.
hang on, before you do that, sorry, I'm going to stop you there too because, um, like I coach and teach, and to me, the big skill piece, the thing that enables me to do that as well as possible is to embody the things that I'm teaching.
Hmm.
And so hearing you say that, I think that is such a rare trait, and most people have not caught on to that idea that to be pragmatic, not only does it increase the effectiveness of your ability to transfer information, but it increases the speed
Hmm.
because you go, hang on, this is first and foremost for me. I need to learn something that's going to give me something
Yeah.
better in the real world. And the moment you see that it works, then you understand it, and then you're able to tell someone a story about what you've learned and how it works for you and how it worked for them. And it's a very quick way of reproducing information, but it's very wholehearted
Yeah.
and very authentic. So
That's
that's
actually,
obviously been a big part of your success, and I'm sure that comes up later in the story as well.
yeah. No, you're 100% right. I think that's been central to the way I went through any additional jobs, was always twofold. One, try to take the next, as soon as I felt 70% ready for the next job, ask for the next job
Mm,
and just hope
mm,
that I would swim. Um, Never waiting to feel like, okay, I'm 100% ready now. Like, okay, I'm ready for the next job. Can I go and look for it? Always wait until I was about maybe 70% capable and then seek to jump into the next one so that I would learn faster. And then in every
mm,
one of those jobs, I would just try to absorb as much information, read as many things as possible, go to seminars to try to learn stuff, apply it immediately to your point, and then go, okay, I think I know how to do that now. All right, what's the next thing? And so I kept just sort of jumping around. That was part of, Anna and I met 20 years ago when I was in sales in that first job. Um,
mm.
and she was in marketing, and we sort of fell in love at work, workplace romance, and the 17 moves that we've done since then have really been that kind of pattern playing out. Like, okay, this has been great, it's been exciting, I've got 70% of that now. Okay, what's the next thing? What is, if it requires a new location, great, like how exciting! Let's just go.
Were you aware at the time of the beliefs you had about yourself that kind of underpinned that? Because that as an idea is quite risky. You have to embrace a high level of uncertainty to
Mm.
do that, and a high level of confidence in your own ability to make that work. So, were you just kind of living in that experience and watching it happen, or were you aware of really being clear of what you must believe about yourself to make that work? How did that play out for you as a young man?
I think I think it was twofold. On the one hand, I think my parents had really instilled a belief in me that if you really want to go after it, just go after it. Like, you'll be fine. Just back yourself. Even if you fail, you'll be fine. You'll pick yourself up. But on the flip side, and
Just before you go, don't forget what you're going to say. Your parents actually didn't instill that in you. They didn't have that power. That's an important distinction that um, is credit to you, because like most people imagine parents have that direct ability to just implant meaning and story and beliefs, but that's not true, because if they did, then every child would turn out the same. If you have
mm,
four siblings, same parents, same conversation, same thing. One goes this way, one goes this way,
that's
one's
true.
confident, one's shy. It's like I love Don Miguel Ruiz's work, The Four Agreements, and he says, "Look, it's not the words spoken to you that change your life; it's just the ones you agree with. So you're actually at the center
Yeah.
of your life. You're the one with the pen. You're not. No one's writing the script for you. And if you can see that, it makes a difference in your ability to then alter that. Because if your parents were the ones that installed a belief, great, you think they installed a good belief. But what about the people who think parents installed a bad belief?
Mm,
If it's the parents' fault, then you got to wait for the parents to fix it. And what if they can't? What if they won't?
yeah.
Um, but if you kind of realize, no, I agreed. I thought that worked. It made sense to me, and so I signed off on it. That's why it became part of me. So
Yeah, that's interesting.
carry on, carry,
But
carry.
what you said also reminded me that when one of the things that Anna and I that really built our relationship in the early days, it really sort of united us, was we were going to seminars and stuff together, and I really wanted to learn about neurolinguistics, neurolinguistic programming, NLP, stuff that Tony Robbins used to
Yeah.
do, because he was into it, so I needed to be into it. And we went to our first training, and I remember one of the things that I remember this sort of aha moment where I realized that whilst, yes, I believed in myself, um, I also had a really strong driver to prove myself. To
Mm,
I wasn't. I sort of uncovered in this session. I remember thinking, who am I proving myself to? But I had a really strong. I'd sort of, because I'd had some success quickly. I then built this persona in my own mind that, like, well, if I'm succeeding like that, I've got to succeed like that all the time. I have to keep proving myself and keep leveling up and put a lot of pressure on myself. And I realized it was probably only a couple of years later that a big part of that was doing that for other people, but I didn't really know who other people were.
mm,
So it wasn't all, positivity, just go after it, sure. And I definitely felt I was competitive and I wanted to win, um, not to the detriment of other people. So it was never a, win lose,
mm.
but yeah, because I think I had a bit of a, I don't know if it's a chip on your shoulder, I don't know if that's the right word, but I wanted to prove myself to something or someone.
Yeah, and great self awareness to notice that and make an adjustment. But when dealing with that, with the insecurity piece in my line of work, I would say it's almost inevitable that young people have that proven defend energy, and it actually is like rocket fuel for a season.
Mm,
It just is
yeah.
quite um, destructive and toxic at the same time. So it certainly makes you do some amazing things,
Mm,
but at some point it will cost you and ruin your life if you don't become aware of that and
yeah.
upgrade the motivation to something more sustainable and authentic. So credit to you that you're able to pull yourself up, notice that, and adjust that strategy. Yeah, carry on. What happened next?
So yeah, went from sort of senior sales roles, making heaps of money, and the general manager that I'd sought out said, "Yeah, I have got you want to be a general manager? You need to learn the rest of the business. Like, not many general managers are just going to come straight up the sales chain and become a general manager. They actually need to learn about customer service and data and quality and finance and all this other stuff." And I was like, "Okay, so how do I do that?" And he said, "Well, I've got a terrible job for you in Melbourne. You've got to move from Sydney to Melbourne." He goes, "It's an awful job. There's this team of people where there's all this work going into it, and nothing seems to be coming out the other side. No one has any idea what's going on when in this group of people. It's causing a huge bottleneck. you're currently making close to a couple of $100,000 a year as a sales guy because you're making all these commissions. This job's about 45 grand a year, so you'll be taking a pretty material haircut. Would you like to take it? And I was like, wow, what a choice. Sure, yeah, let's do it. So we moved, and and it was.
Hang on, why did you say yes to that opportunity? What were you intrigued about?
I think I was probably because I'd been so, Tony Robbins had always said, I'm definitely still a Tony fan, by the way. Tony had
Me
always
too.
said that modeling was such an important skill. And so I looked for people who already had what I wanted or had achieved what I wanted to achieve at a certain age, and then was like, well, tell me what to do and I'll just do it. Like, I'm quite happy not to spend much time talking about it or guessing it or thinking, oh, should I, shouldn't I?
Mm.
I'll just get on with it and do it, which probably aligns with I guess my kind of learning style. I can be quite good at learning and implementing things even without a really strong reason why, just because I'm happy to take the lead. Happy to be led. So he said, you should do this. And I said, okay. So did a data quality
That was enough.
gig, did a data gig, did a quality management gig. I think there was a customer service gig in there somewhere. And then Anna and I, it was clear that she was great at project management and business analysis, are really good at like pulling apart operational stuff and fixing things. I was really good on the people side. So we then sort of moved around the country with the company, solving people and process problems kind of together. So it became like a partnership, take me, take Anna, take me kind of model. So that's cool. So anyway, that brought me all the way up until probably 2006, stayed in this company, hopped around. And then eventually we wanted to create a business together. And we were on business plan 13. I remember when Lockie had just been born, we moved from Adelaide. He was 4 weeks old. We moved from Adelaide back to Sydney. And there was a point where Anna was going to have to come back off maternity leave. And we were like, well, it's now or never. Like, are we just going to jump in the deep end or what are we going to do? And we were like, yeah, let's do it. And we'd saved up all this money and we had a terrible idea for the current model that we were on, because we had just been through a pregnancy. Of course, was pregnancy related, which was about having a retreat for couples to come to and do like pregnancy yoga and pregnancy photography. Basically, have their last holiday together before they sort of lose their freedom for a pretty long time. So we went all in. We quit our jobs. We put all our money that we'd been saving for years into what do you call it? Like a bed and breakfast up in the Central Coast in Avoca Beach, and feeling like a complete imposter, and also knowing I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. Like I'd been succeeding in sales basically, plus a few other leadership roles, and now I was going to be running this like pregnancy and parenting retreat. I don't know. So anyway, 6 months in, that was probably one of the hardest periods of my life, no question, because 6 months in, I remember I'll never forget this night where Lockie was downstairs. He was 6, 7 months old, and he was in bed asleep, and I was crying up in the office because I'd realized that basically we'd burned through all the money. We'd had to get a credit card, so we're now like we'd maxed the credit card. It was like 20 grand or something, so we're 20 grand in debt, which we'd never been in before. And I knew that if I didn't make, I think it was like $1,300 or something, that I know I needed to make about 2 grand, and we had a $1,300 a week mortgage, and I had no idea what bankrupt was, but I realized if I don't make $2,000 this week, like we are screwed, and I don't feel like someone just comes and knocks on the door. Like we were in our sort of mid-20s, but we had to trade our way out of it, and I realized I'd been spending all this time focusing on something that wasn't something that I was great at, something that I loved, or something that people wanted, needed, and were willing to pay for. And I'd heard that somewhere in a book or something, and so I drew these diagrams. Okay, what do I love? What am I great at? What do people want, need, and willing to pay for? And I quickly realized that I was good at sales. I loved training. Why aren't I doing sales training? People pay for that. And I was like, huh. So the next morning, I just got my phone out. I went through every single person who had a sales team. And the first call I made, I had a $20,000 sales training booked for the following week for 2 days. And I was like, I'd spent 6 months with just all the money flying out the door, not a single sort of inquiry that I could convert. And in 2 hours, I had $20,000. I was like, huh, okay, that's a pretty big learning. And I then had to trade my way out on sales training for the next couple of years.
And just like amazing story, but I imagine you didn't have a website or a sales training business already. You just kind of said yes, and then backfield work out
Yeah.
how later
Well, everybody I knew in my
necessity of
network knew
other
that I was
involving
good at
ventures.
sales and sort of sales and
Mm,
sales training and sales leadership. So I was
amazing.
able to just call people, and that kind of got us started on the next business.
So that sounds like your first real failure of to a degree,
Yeah.
almost catastrophic. Did that linger with you? Were you able to bounce back quickly? How did you carry that experience? What was the impact, good or bad, from that?
Yeah. That's a good question. There was two major things that came out of that. One, I realized if I'm put into a corner and my family's threatened, I will do whatever it takes I will come out swinging. Like there is nothing that's going
Mm,
to stop me making sure that I sort of play my role and protect my family. So that was one thing that really became a strong piece of evidence for me, that I knew that actually there's nothing that you can do to me. You could take everything away that I own as long as I have my family. I could happily just go and live in a caravan as long as I've got my family there. Fine, no problem. And I will fight. I'll do whatever job I need to do, which became required several years later in the probably second biggest failure or difficult year of my life. Didn't know that we were going to have a therapy session on this one, but the other thing that came out of
hang
it.
on, wait, what? You didn't know we're having a therapy? Of course, they were going to have a therapy session. That's where this was going
That's
from the
perfect.
start.
Um, and then the second, so one was that sort of resolve that I'll do whatever it takes, and I know that, and I've now proven that to myself, and that I can succeed in doing so. And then the second thing was um, that it's very easy to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And I see this in people's career changes regularly, where they're like, okay, I've spent 25 years doing X, but I really need to change. So I'm going to do Y. And it's got absolutely nothing to do with it. All their networks are going to disappear. And I just think there's a lot to throw out there. Like there's always ways to create newness, but not to get rid of everything that actually has already become, you've already got a brand, you've already got people trust you for a reason doing whatever it is that you do. So sometimes there's ways to leverage that. So
Mm,
anyway, that took us into a period where we ran our own business for a while, and led up to this really fascinating, well, really to the step back into working for other people and and sort of rapidly climbing into being a CEO. Uh, the first gig was a general manager's role where company had just bought an education business, needed a turnaround. Well, they didn't tell me that needed a turnaround. They said, "Oh, it's amazing. We just bought this fantastic business." And I walked in the door, and a really good friend of mine became the CEO. I was the general manager, and we became partners in crime very quickly. And realized on day, I don't know, it was like day 7 or something, that they were supposed to have 300 and something students. We did the head count around all the campuses, 107, and I was like, as we're doing the numbers, and I was like, this business would be losing $350,000 a quarter. It's definitely not profitable. It's a long way from profitable. So we went to the MD who just paid for this business. I was like, did you guys do any due diligence? Like what's going on here? And they're like, oh, didn't realize it was in that bad a state. Well, it's now March. I know you've just left your business. Sorry about that. You've got till August to put it back in the black. And if you do, we'll keep it open. If you can't, then we'll just shut it. And I was like, wow. Okay. So we got it back into the black by August, and we did a great turnaround on that business. And in a couple of years, it was doing really well. But that created some amazing things. It created this incredible passion for education and to work in education, which I've spent the last 15 years doing since then. I had the most amazing learning experience working for the CEO, a really good friend of mine, Ben, who was just transformational in his ability to bring people together around a sort of, to unite people in a crisis situation. And I learned a lot about how to build culture from
mm,
him. And but then at the end of that job represented the worst 12 months of my life. So this was, after the difficult period. Yeah, it kind of led to this really difficult period in 2011, which was probably the last time I had a really awful year. So I've had a pretty great run for the last, I don't know, 12
mm.
years or so. But after doing this turnaround, and we built the growth plans. We got it back to, I don't know, 6 million in revenue, and it was healthy and profitable. And the next year it was going to 10, and I got made redundant. And it was the first, and I was so shocked. Like it literally just destroyed. Somebody said to me, there's a point in your life somewhere, usually in your 30s or early 40s, and I know that you talk a lot about the sort of key transition stages where the universe just needs to deconstruct you and sort of put you back together, and you've got to put yourself back together again. This for me was this
Mm.
like 6 to 8 month period where it all happened all at once. It was the first time anyone else had actually made a decision about my future that I didn't feel like I was in control of, and it
Yeah.
just shook my confidence to the core. Like I was like, oh my god, somebody else can influence what my life looks like, and I'd spent all of this time trying to build my life by design and all the rest. Um, and I was stuck in Canberra because we'd gone home to be, my dad was dying, and so it was a tough period for the family anyway. And then, so I was then without a job. I was stuck in Canberra, which was the worst place I could possibly be for somebody who was in kind of commercial education because there's pretty much no industry at all, other than a few tiny businesses at a TAFE. And and then about 4 months later, so I was struggling to find a job that was of any interest and meaningful. 4 months later, my dad died, which was just, which was just awful. Um, and I was so struggling to find a role. I had to go back. This was, I don't know how old I was. I guess I was 2000. Anyway, 12. I was probably early 30s or something. I had to go back to a commission only sales role, basically just sucking eggs every day for this awful owner of a terrible magazine, selling space in a magazine just to put food on the table. So it was like the second time where I'd had to just do whatever it took to look after the family, but it was just like eating razor blades every day. It was awful.
Just to highlight the difference with the second time hearing you say it was, I mean, the first time you kind of were to blame. You couldn't really point the finger at anyone.
Yeah.
You had a great idea, which in hindsight wasn't such a great idea, and okay, yep, and you found a way out of it. Second time, you had done great work. You'd brought your best skills to the game, experienced extraordinary success, exceeded other people's expectations, done what you were best at, and then got punished for being awesome. Then,
That's
like
how it
the
felt.
injustice of that,
Yeah.
um, that to me seems like much more a catastrophic experience than the first one because you're like, well, hang on a minute. I get it. If I make a mistake, yeah, I should
Mm,
experience negative consequences. But if I do awesome,
yeah.
wouldn't I be entitled to expect awesome results and good things to come my way? So
And the reason
um,
given
that
was
sense of
it was so cold and like logical
mm,
and clear. The business had gone well. They needed the money to support another business that they had. And so I was just the most expensive cost. And they're like, sorry, you're just too expensive. And you built a great team and a great process and we can take it from here. And I was like, really? Okay. But yeah, it felt so cold. And of course I'd become best friends with the CEO and he had to fire me. And that was, that was very difficult for him too.
so those kind of turning points when people get deconstructed, they face injustice. It's a shock to them. They didn't see it coming. They didn't imagine it was possible. Hard not to take it personally. That there are plenty of people who don't recover from those kind of experiences. Who that does take them out of the game for good, and they end up bitter. They end up lonely. That injustice kind of rules their life and hardens their heart. So, how did you how did you not lose yourself in that process?
Well, I remember in the middle of I was getting abused by the owner of this magazine who was a drunk, and he just used to come and abuse, even though I was making the vast majority of the money there, so that I could put food on the table, and he just used to abuse me on a regular basis. And I remember thinking, how did I end up here? Like this is just such an awful place to be. And so I just knew, and my dad had died, and so I was like, my ties to Canberra are now complete. We don't need to be here anymore. We just need to find something different. So I just hunted really hard for the right gig and found an incredible, wonderful CEO, like my next sort of main mentor in my life. There's probably been probably three that have really just transformed the way that I thought. And he gave me an opportunity to come and build all the sales and marketing capability for a large education business. Moved to Sydney. So Anna was happy because she didn't have to live in Canberra anymore either. She's not a huge fan of the cold. And and that kicked off a trajectory of like that was my first proper large scale executive role in a big company, and that was the first of probably the kind of four sort of mini chapters, if you like, that led to creating $100 million in additional revenue in four companies in 8 years with my teams. And I think I was just so grateful to have an opportunity for again to be back with someone who backed me, someone who really challenged me to think bigger and just
Mm.
gave me lots of rope to sort of go after it. So I think I was so determined to create a better situation for myself and the family because I'm pretty values driven, and I couldn't I couldn't even consider the thought of just doing a sort of soul destroying job. We'd made all of our decisions based on values. We were just jumping around all over the country. It's like, that
Yeah.
sounds interesting. Yeah, let's do that. That's going to be adventure. Let's do that. And so, yeah, so that was definitely the lowest point I've ever been at. But I was super fortunate to find something to help me bounce back off it.
I mean, hindsight's wonderful, isn't it? Because I'm sure that you look back now and go, okay, the obstacle was the way, that built resilience, and then you've got a bunch of experience to share with others when they're going through similar. But in the midst of it, it's very dangerous, and no guarantee you're going to come out the other side. And certainly doesn't look like the obstacle is the way. You'd prefer the obstacle just to be moved out of the way. It seems like an unfair and unnecessary obstacle. So good for you that you came through it alive and intact and without having lost yourself. It's no small achievement.
And I think, the majority of the credit goes to Anna, because we had built such a strong relationship. I knew that she had my back no matter what. And so she was like, "Hey, if we don't need, if the opportunity's in Brisbane, we'll go to Brisbane. If the opportunity's in New Zealand, we'll go to New Zealand. Like, just follow your heart, find something that inspires you, and we'll be fine." So she's always backed those kinds of big decisions.
Lovely. Okay, where's the story go from there?
Well, I guess that was kind of Sydney in 2012. So the next that really led into the kind of four really interesting jobs, I guess. One was that education business we are able to take from 80 to 123 mil over 3 years by, I was lucky. I got given sales, and so we were acquiring all these businesses. I had to bring all the salespeople together and all the marketing people. I got the marketing opportunity, then the product development opportunity, and business development opportunities. And so it was sort of building a better product strategy, optimizing sales and marketing. It was building new channels to leverage and create delivery of our products. Other people delivering our products, but ultimately we were able to grow from 5,000 to 12,000 students over the next 3 years, which really just catapulted the revenues, which was amazing. But for me, and I got lots of learnings around that. But when I think about, the kind of conversation we're having, I think about how I felt about that period, like a few things. One, I worked for the smartest person I've ever met, like Warren, who I'm sure hopefully will listen to this at some point, and he knows that I feel about this way about him. And we still catch up on a regular basis. Just inspiring, intelligent, so supportive. Just backed me to the hilt and gave me room and gave me space. But I also have never worked harder than that period of my life. I was living in Brisbane. I was, getting up at 3 o'clock on Tuesday morning, flying to Sydney. I'd just have back-to-back meetings all day, all night, work 3 days, sort of just super hard, come back 10 o'clock at night on a Thursday night. And my life was just so intense. I remember about 2 years into that, and that was my first sort of, executive role, if you like, and thinking, how do people do this? How do people do a lifetime of this? I thought I literally could not do another 2 years. I would fall over and die. I had this, moment where I was at work one day and I had to just run to the bathroom and throw up. And I knew I hadn't had there was no food poisoning or anything else. And I realized I was actually just so stressed. I was so stressed with
Wow.
the volume and the speed and the pace of work that, and I had to, it was really hard to wind my way out of that and to create space to be effective. But it was an incredible learning process and a big journey and lots of success, which kind of then led to the next big kind of CEO role.
Well, another pain moment. You broke your mum. That led to some change. Then you break yourself. Um, to notice that, again, it's no small thing. I watch people go past the point of breaking themselves because they can't afford to listen to that pain. They're like, yeah, but this is me and this is what I have to do. So I have to find a way to dig deeper and to dive into reserves of energy that aren't even there. Um, so yeah, again, credit to you, your emotional intelligence, your relationship with yourself, to listen and move on. So yeah, so what was that? What was the next opportunity that came off the back of that?
Well, there was what it really led to. The next major one, I'm conscious of the amount of time we've probably got, but the next major one, which was really the last sort of 4 years before I started my own business. was building an education portfolio for a publicly listed company, which is still there today. It's called Adventure Co. The team that I recruited are still there and kicking goals and doing a great job. And we saw, but it started as a kind of $3 million worth of revenue with a couple of tiny trades training businesses, teaching people bricklaying and carpentry and a bunch of other things. And we built out a portfolio around particularly IT training across the Asia Pacific with joint ventures in the Philippines, acquisitions in New Zealand, and all over the place. But for me, it was this incredible job where I learned a huge amount about mergers and acquisitions because we were out there, looking for businesses, buying businesses, trying to raise capital, all that sort of thing. But the thing that I loved about it and how it sort of turned into today, because I'm always a big believer that each one of those, chapters, of course, there's something that you take forward into the next one and not just distinct chapters. That one, I fell in love with founders with these 7 million, 7-figure sort of businesses, like 1 to 10 million type businesses, where I got the opportunity then to either replace the founder or the CEO with our own management, and then help basically mentor those leaders and their leadership teams to develop strategy and execute it, or to so whether it was our management or it was the acquired business. But what I loved was this great opportunity, probably going right back to the sales days, where I was able to absorb every possible model I could find on how to scale a business. And I was just applying. So I was just ruthless in how much practical stuff I, jammed down the throat of the team, the poor things. But we learned a huge amount as a collective along the way, and it just turned into some great outcomes. That business today is doing 70 plus million dollars. It's doing really well. It's continued to grow. It's continued to acquire. But what I'm thrilled about is that the team that I recruited, the vast majority, all the kind of key people, they're all still there. They're all still kicking goals. And when I realized a couple of years ago that I just didn't want to work for anybody else anymore, and I wanted to do my own thing, and I found this special space of working with founders who are at this sort of level and helping them with all of these things that I'd learned and applied with my teams to scale a business up. There was an opportunity to help people who've never built a business bigger than the one that they're doing today, and to bring some of that that capability and that framework and that rigor to help them fulfill the potential of their businesses and create more value in the world. And I thought, well, that just fits every part of my DNA. Like serving others, helping people create value, getting to make my own decisions, getting to create a lifestyle where I can choose to be in different locations, where I can continue to create adventure without having to be constrained by something. And so all of that is happening now. And we're just about to release, I spent the last couple of years doing that as sort of Sean Steele and advising founders on my own. But we're just about to launch. At the time this goes live, we'll probably have already launched. I'll be very close to launching Scale HQ, which is a new brand. There'll be a new website. We've got courses coming, got a whole bunch of stuff. But that's this next big chapter of, I don't know, 10 years, at least 10 years plus. Like I don't intend to do anything else other than build and scale this business so that we can help more founders in that category fulfill what their ambitions are.
It's always a gift to hear someone's story, because I don't think this is not a typical conversation you get to have with a human being. It's, how you going? Good? Oh, yeah, I am. How you been? Busy?
Yeah.
Yeah, geez, I've been busy. All right, catch ya. And so, like, to hear a person's story, I just think it's one of the real special experiences we get to have as humans. So, thanks for allowing me the opportunity to be the one that got to hear your story. And I'm
My pleasure.
sure your listeners will be loving this, and just because you're an extraordinary human being, like that, to have gone through what you've been through, and to be who you are in the world today. Like, that's it. You clearly are showing up, making a difference, and you do that out of the overflow of who you are. So, um, when you hear yourself tell your story the way you did, what stands out for you? Like, what do you think has been the themes, the key learnings, the stuff that's really been the bedrock of how you got here, and the success stuff, the stuff that's really made the difference for you?
Well, I think the obviously, when for people who haven't heard about you before, you've got the podcast Unhindered, and you've written books on insecurity and all sorts of stuff. And I was thinking about how much insecurity I faced over that time, and that it's very easy to look at people who you can put on a pedestal and go, oh, they've made it in some way, and think that somehow they didn't deal with all that stuff. And when I think back on
Mm.
this journey, the things that really jump out to me are the relationships that I built along the way, but also that each one of those opportunities came from a willingness to get into a really uncomfortable place and feel like an imposter for ages.
Mm.
In every one of those. So every single job that I had to level up for, how do you get to being a CEO? Well, no one's told you how to be a CEO before you get to being a CEO. It doesn't just go, oh, you're going to be the CEO in 3 months' time. You're like, oh my God, what does that mean? Like, better start reading. Every one of those opportunities has come from being willing to take that risk before you're comfortable. And so I think that probably stands out at me as something that's really bound it together, and that willingness to, just the willingness to be uncomfortable enough to learn and trust that actually it may not be perfect and it might all go to shit, but you'll actually be okay. You'll still be all right. Like, as long as you've got the relationships that matter still intact. Like, I think, I've spent a fair bit of time with really successful CEOs around the world, and particularly in Australia. And just because they've got a lot of money, don't fall in a trap of thinking they've got perfect lives, because they absolutely do not. And it's probably one of the most startling things I learned along the way, was that people who had just incredible financial and work success just had the most broken relationships you've ever seen. And I thought, you're going to have some unbelievable financial event in 5 years or 10 years time, and you're going to be so excited. You're telling me that you do it because you're doing it for your family, and you're going to turn around and it's just going to be tumbleweeds, and no one is going to be there because you have ignored them the entire time, and the only thing they want from you is time. So one of the things I think, probably the thing that I'm proudest of, is that through that process and all those different challenges and the changes and all the rest, is I have managed to keep my values around how much time I spend with my family, how I spend time with my family, broadly speaking, intact. Probably other than the 3 a.m., the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday period. That was pretty hard. But broadly speaking, that relationship's always been protected, because I thought, I don't want to get to any level of anything and find that those people aren't there.
Back to your dad being a priest. A biblical quote: "What would it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul?"
Yeah, that's nicely put.
Is there a question that you were hoping I would ask you that I haven't yet got to? Feels like we've come to a really lovely place at the end of the conversation, but is there anything else that you'd like to share about the journey that I haven't drawn out?
Not really, other than I feel that it would be really appropriate for me to just express my gratitude to the people that have inspired me the most along the way. Anna, my wife, no question, the absolute bedrock of my life, and has just always been the best coach and consultant, and pushing me back against my own stuff along the way, and not just accepting, whatever crap I came up with along the way. And probably the 3 or 4 leaders that have just had the biggest influence, Ben Farinazzo, who was I learned everything about transformation from; Warren Jacobson, who I learned so much about how to elevate towards to a CEO mindset; Reed Meldrum, who I followed around for years in Census and other places, who just had an incredible approach to execution and humanity in the way that he engaged with people. And I just really tried to absorb as much as I could from those mentors. So thanks to those people, being a huge part of my life.
Great place to end.
Thanks so much, Jaemin.
My privilege, pleasure. No worries.
G'day everyone, just a couple of quick things before you go. If you have questions that you'd love myself or an upcoming guest to tackle about challenges that you're facing in scaling your business, please just jump straight on the website, scaleupspodcast.com. You can record your message straight from your mobile by hitting the button on the right-hand side of the page, or you can just email them the old-fashioned way, questions@scaleupspodcast.com. And just a quick reminder, nothing we spoke about today constitutes financial or business advice. If you are considering making big decisions in your business, seek out a professional who can look at your situation in detail and make sure you're getting sound, personalised advice. Thanks for listening. Look forward to being back in your podcast feed next week.